I dreamed of a place that didn't appear on any map, not lost, just never listed. A hilltop above the clouds where stars once gathered to whisper secrets to the earth. There stood an old observatory, its dome cracked, rust crawling along its seams. Yet the structure remained tall, quiet, as if listening still. I arrived without memory of how I'd come, only that I was supposed to be there, as if summoned by something older than language. The wind was gentle but purposeful, each gust pushing me up the stone path, lined with glowing mushrooms, soft blue light pooling at my feet. The door creaked open before I touched it, not as a welcome, but as recognition. Inside, time hung heavy in the air, like incense in a forgotten temple. Dust drifted like falling ash, and the walls were lined with faded charts. Constellations I didn't recognize, yet knew by heart. A staircase spiraled upward, narrow and wooden, each step singing softly under my weight. A lullaby in the key of silence. At the top was the viewing room, circular, wide, its glass dome fractured but still whole, letting moonlight spill like milk across the floor. A great telescope stood at its center, brass and bone and shadow, pointed not at the sky, but downward into the mountain itself. I looked through the eyepiece, expecting darkness. Instead, I saw stars, not above, but below, as if the mountain hid a galaxy inside it. The stars moved, not randomly, but in phrases like thoughts, or instructions, or confessions written in light. And then I heard her, a voice, not in my ears, but in my bones. "You're not the first," she said. Her tone was neither warning nor welcome, only truth. You came here before you were born, and you will return long after you're gone. I turned, but no one stood behind me. Only a velvet chair, facing the glass dome, with a book resting in its seat. I picked it up. Its cover was blank, but warm. It pulsed faintly, like something alive. Inside, the pages shifted as I held them. Images formed, stories unfolded, not written, but remembered. The first story was of a boy who swallowed stardust and spoke in constellations. He wandered the world, drawing maps that guided no one but himself. The second told of a woman who wove galaxies into her hair, and when she wept, black holes bloomed in the sky. I closed the book gently. The observatory groaned softly, not in pain, but remembrance. I sat in the chair, and for a moment, everything in the universe sat with me. The wind outside slowed. The stars in the mountain blinked slowly, one by one, as if watching or resting. I leaned back, and just before sleep took me, I felt the chair lift, not in movement, but in memory, like it remembered what it once was and was becoming it again. Then all went dark, not with fear, but with full surrender. The city changed as I wandered deeper, not just in shape or color, but in logic. Buildings folded inward like origami under a dreamer's breath, and alleys moved when I wasn't looking. Street lamps whispered in forgotten dialects, casting halos that flickered like fireflies. The sky above was dark, but not from clouds. It was layered with drifting sheets of translucent silk, as if the world wore veils to protect something sacred. I came to a courtyard, paved in shattered mirrors, and yet when I looked down, I saw no reflection. Only memories, projected faintly into the broken glass. A child spinning beneath snowfall. A door I once closed without saying goodbye. Someone who held my hand and then disappeared. I stepped lightly between them, not to disturb what couldn't be undone. In the center of the courtyard, a fountain trickled upside down, its water spiraling into the air, then vanishing like steam. And near it stood a figure, cloaked in shadows that didn't match the light. They wore no face, only a mirrored surface. And when I looked into it, I saw myself older and at peace. The figure bowed slightly, then pointed toward an archway I hadn't noticed before. The arch pulsed faintly with silver threads, like veins through marble. I stepped through. On the other side, the air was thick with quiet. I found myself in a hallway lined with doors, all shut tight, but each door hummed with the low rhythm of breathing. They weren't rooms. They were dreams being lived in, separately. Some let out warm golden light. Others flickered with blue sorrow. I placed my hand on one door. It opened into a memory I didn't recognize, but knew was mine. A meadow. A table with tea set for two. An empty chair across from me. And a letter tucked beneath the saucer, written in a language I had never learned, but somehow understood. "Thank you for waiting," it read. The breeze shifted, and with it, the scene dissolved. I was back in the hallway. Further down, one door was ajar. I entered. A stairwell spiraled down, impossibly long. Each step echoed not with sound, but with memory. I descended. At the bottom was a platform of marble, floating above a lake of ink. Candles floated in the air, forming constellations around me. In the center of the platform, a notebook rested on a pedestal. Its pages glowed faintly, and when I touched them, images spilled into the air like breath in cold air. A woman laughing. A bridge made of light. A fox curled in sleep beside a grave, marked only with a feather. The final page read, "This part of the dream is yours now." And with that, the notebook turned to mist. I stood still, unsure if I had woken or simply become part of the dream myself. I reached the base of the lighthouse as the tide receded. Wet stones shimmered like mirrors beneath my boots, and the tower itself rose like a memory carved into sky. Its surface was weather-worn, bleached white in places, with veins of rust that ran like stories never told. I expected the door to be locked, but it opened at the slightest touch, not with a creak, but with a hush, as if even the hinges had grown quiet from waiting. Inside, there was no dust, no signs of abandonment, only time suspended. The air was thick with salt and memory. A spiral staircase hugged the inner wall, its steps made of stone, worn to curves by the feet of people I would never know. Each step echoed differently, some loud, some hollow, some silent. And with each turn upward, the light from below faded, while something ahead began to glow. Halfway up, I came to a landing, a round room with no windows, only a single chair facing a mirror. The mirror showed a version of me I didn't recognize. Older, maybe, or just truer. He looked back with a softness I hadn't earned yet, and mouthed words I couldn't hear. When I blinked, he was gone. The mirror only reflected the room again, and I climbed. At the top, the beacon chamber was larger than it should have been. An entire sky unfolded inside it. Clouds drifting slowly across a domed ceiling. A crystal lens floated in the center, not attached to anything, just suspended there, spinning slowly, casting a pale blue light in every direction. It made no sound, but I could feel it, low in my chest, like a steady heartbeat that wasn't mine. I stepped closer and saw that the lens wasn't glass. It was water, still yet rippling, reflecting images that weren't part of the room. I saw cities I'd never visited, people I'd never met, moments I hadn't lived. And then I saw myself again, not in the mirror, but in the light itself, sleeping, dreaming, held by the sea. I reached out to touch the lens, and it parted, not like water, but like memory. Behind it was a staircase that went down, deeper than the tower should allow. I descended. The walls glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss, pulsing in time with something ancient. The air grew cooler, thicker, and the sound of waves returned, but distant, distorted, as if I was walking inside the ocean's memory. Eventually, the stairs opened to a vast cavern filled with water, still as glass. And floating in the center, a bed, not submerged, but resting gently atop the surface, held by nothing. A figure lay there, eyes closed, hands folded across the chest, breathing slow and even. It was me, but not quite. A quieter version, one that had let go. I didn't disturb him. I couldn't. I only watched. And the water around him began to glow. A soft pulse in rhythm with the light above. Then, without warning, he opened his eyes, met mine, and smiled. I woke up, still inside the lighthouse, still holding the salt-soaked journal, still listening to the hum of the beacon. And I knew this place didn't just mark time, it remembered it. And now, so would I. The street curved downward, more than I remembered. Like the city was sinking, or maybe I was rising. And as I followed its slope, the fog that clung to the alleys began to thicken. There were signs posted on the walls, notices in pale ink. "Do not wake what swims below," one said. Another read, "Trust only the doors that open without sound." I turned a corner and stepped onto a boulevard paved with shells, not crushed, but whole, intact, gleaming with dew, and whispering underfoot like wind chimes. The buildings here slouched under the weight of their own roofs. Archways bowed, balconies crumbled. But still, lights flickered inside, not electric, not fire, but a glow, like moonlight refracted through water. And there were people now, I think, or reflections of people, walking backward, holding umbrellas that dripped upward, faces obscured by sleep masks stitched with stars. No one spoke. No one seemed surprised by me. A woman in a robe made of hourglasses brushed past me, all of them ticking at different speeds. She whispered something as she passed. "Not all dreams are yours to finish." I walked until the city ended. Abruptly, like a book with the last page torn out. Ahead was only a dock, and beyond that, an endless sleepwalk sea. The water shimmered in ways my eyes couldn't follow. Waves moved sideways, backward, then forward again. And the sky above it pulsed with soft indigo light. A small boat waited. No oars, no sail. Just a name carved into its side, stillness. I stepped inside. It rocked gently, but then it began to move. Not across the water, but beneath it. We sank slowly, as if the water parted for us, layer by layer. Past schools of fish shaped like thoughts I had once forgotten. Past ruins of places I never built, but somehow remembered. Deeper still, where light bent into strange geometries, and shadows swam with purpose. I saw a cathedral made of glass coral, its spires humming with lullabies in a language I didn't speak. The boat docked at a platform of bone-white stone. Above it, a sign read, "Library of Drowned Time." I stepped off. The water didn't touch me. I walked dry through a threshold older than memory, into halls lined with hourglasses that flowed upward, sideways, stopped, and started again. Inside, voices murmured without mouths. Books breathed gently on shelves. One tome floated to me, opened mid-air, and said, "Only, you've been here before." I turned and saw my reflection standing behind me, older, softer, eyes full of sleep. It nodded once and vanished. I stayed there for what felt like a week inside a second, until I heard the train again. That low, distant whistle, calling me home. I stepped back into the boat, and this time I rose. Through memory, through fog, through the thin membrane of night, until I returned once more to the edge of sleep and the chime of the old clock tower. I crossed the threshold into the atrium beyond the mirrored hall, and everything shifted. The air thinned into something silkier, like memory suspended in water. Above me, the ceiling unfurled like a sky stitched from pages, each one etched with constellations made of words I'd forgotten how to pronounce. They shimmered softly, not as light, but as recognition, like remembering a lullaby from a childhood you never lived. The floor beneath my feet was not solid. It rippled gently with every step, like standing atop a lake of smoke. Yet I did not sink. The ground accepted me, like it had been waiting. Towering columns lined the walls, each carved with portraits of figures I almost recognized. A woman with a clock for a face, a child holding a lantern made of breath, an old man whose beard flowed into rivers on the stone. One of them blinked. I paused. The eyes in the carving didn't move again, but in the reflection of the stone, I saw myself as a child carrying a backpack made of stars, dragging my hand across the wall, whispering something, but I couldn't hear the words. Then a chime echoed through the hall, not a mechanical bell, but the sound of glass being kissed by wind. I turned and saw a doorway at the far end of the chamber. It hadn't been there before, but I felt no fear, only invitation. I walked through the threshold, and the world folded inward. A spiral staircase descended in slow curls, not carved from stone, but from woven branches in twilight. It was like stepping downward into the belly of a story. As I moved deeper, sounds returned. A faint ticking, the murmur of wind in reeds, and voices, soft and scattered, like leaves brushing against one another. Some voices were my own, but from different times, laughing, crying, whispering things I hadn't yet said. At the base of the stairs was a round room, dimly lit by candles floating mid-air. Each flame hovered over a shallow bowl of water, and in each reflection, I saw a version of myself. One version was older, holding a bundle of letters. Another was younger, asleep on a bench made of feathers. A third was simply standing there, looking at me. I sat down on a rug stitched from pocket watches. All stopped at different times, and then I heard a voice. Not outside, but inside my own chest. "Do you remember where you were going?" it asked. I couldn't answer, because I wasn't sure I had ever known. But the silence didn't feel accusatory. It felt kind. "You've carried so much," it said, "and not all of it was ever yours." My eyes closed without effort. And when I opened them again, I was somewhere else. Now I stood on a platform made of glass, hovering over a vast body of water, the stars reflected below as clearly as they shone above. I couldn't tell where the sky ended and the lake began. An empty train car glided toward me. No engine, no tracks. It coasted silently, like it was being pulled by the gravity of dreams. Its doors opened with a sigh, and inside, there were no seats, just pillows. I stepped in, laid down, and the doors closed gently behind me. The train moved, but it didn't feel like movement. More like the world around me was turning, and I remained still. Outside the windows, I saw entire lifetimes pass like scenery. A girl releasing birds from her hands. A man building a boat from poems. A child planting stars in soil. And as the train carried me onward, I felt no need to know the destination. Only that I was meant to be in motion. That resting was part of the travel. I don't know how long I lay there. Time was a blanket, tucked around my thoughts, warming me without urgency. Eventually, the train slowed, not stopped, just slowed, like it had found a place to pause. The doors opened. Outside was a garden, lit by fireflies, sounded by silence, smelled of lavender and paper and rain. I stepped off the train and knew I had arrived somewhere not final, but familiar. And in the distance, a gate stood open. Just beyond it, a library built from moonlight. I walked toward it with no questions left to ask, only pages left to turn. The orchard thinned, its trees more spaced, more sparse. The shadows no longer fell in uniform lines. They rippled, like the memory of trees rather than the trees themselves. The ground beneath my feet changed. From soil to something softer, like pressed parchment or paper soaked in time. It crinkled quietly with every step, as though I were walking across pages. Words long faded, stories forgotten. Above me, the sky began to echo, not with thunder, but with voices, repeating what I'd just thought, one beat behind my mind, like my inner monologue was no longer private. I turned a corner, though there were no corners, and stood before a house made entirely of windows, framed by vines and antique hinges, a structure that breathed in wind and sighed out starlight. Every pane reflected something different, not of me, but of moments I'd never lived. A version of myself in different coats, different rooms, smiling at strangers I almost remembered. A door opened without a sound. I stepped through into a room full of clocks, none ticking, each one pointing to a different hour. Each one paused, as if time had briefly rested there, then moved on. I passed a clock that pointed to 4:44, its hands trembling, not moving, but aware. Another was frozen at 12:03, the very moment I once said goodbye without meaning to. There was a hallway of doors, no handles, only keyholes, and every keyhole whispered a different name as I walked past. Some I knew, some I had forgotten, some hadn't been born yet. One keyhole called me by the name I had as a child, a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years, a name not even written down anymore. I knelt beside it, and from the hole, warm light spilled into my palm. Then, footsteps, soft, deliberate, but not behind me, beneath me, like someone walking on the floor beneath thought itself. I opened the trap door that wasn't there a moment ago and descended into a space between stories, a room built of unfinished sentences, spoken dreams, and half-imagined songs. The walls there were curved like teacups, etched with lullabies in invisible ink. And as I passed, the ink appeared, not to be read, but to be felt. One line wrapped around my wrist, another curled over my shoulder, and a final phrase settled quietly on my chest. You made it here because you were never fully awake. I stood in the center of the room, where a mirror hovered, not hung, just suspended in place, like a held breath. It showed me as I might have been, if every fear had been met with kindness, if every choice had been trusted. And still, I didn't smile. I nodded, and the mirror bowed back. Not a reflection, but recognition. The ceiling opened, or maybe the dream deepened. I rose through it, drifting like pollen or memory. Above me, an observatory, filled with telescopes pointed not at the stars, but at people's final thoughts. Every lens shimmered with a sentence that had never been said aloud, but needed to be. One whispered, "I forgave you. I just never told you." Another, "I was scared, and I wish I had said something." A third, "Thank you for the small kindness you never knew saved me." I touched the largest telescope, and it tilted toward me. Inside, I saw not a person, but a place I had once loved and never returned to. The telescope folded into itself like origami, becoming a small paper boat which floated down into my palm, still glowing. I held it and felt the gravity of everything I hadn't said, everything I'd forgotten to remember. Then, a sound, not music, but the space between notes, not silence, but the breath just before a dream begins. And I realized I was arriving again, not back at the station, but at the threshold of waking. And before it all slipped away, I whispered something into the room, something I didn't need to understand. Only remember, I was here. I dreamed, and it mattered. I followed the whisper of wind into a ravine I didn't know existed. The ground dipped beneath me in slow descents. A staircase formed not from stone, but from woven roots and folded time. Each step creaked softly underfoot, not from weight, but from memory, as though I wasn't the first to pass this way and wouldn't be the last. The deeper I went, the more the world thinned. Sounds softened. Light grew patient, and the very air felt wrapped in silk. Eventually, I emerged into a chamber so wide it swallowed my breath. A forest inside the earth, lit by bioluminescent leaves and trembling pools of light. Moss grew in deliberate spirals. Trees curved in directions, both ancient and wrong. Birds without wings glided slowly between branches, singing in tones I didn't know could exist. I walked without urgency. My thoughts stretched, detached from the clocks they were born into. There was a river made entirely of ink, flowing upward into the sky. It carried messages, letters, dreams. Pages fluttered past, some blank, some whispering names I hadn't said in years. I dipped my fingers in. The ink didn't stain. Instead, it warmed and then hummed, like recognition, like forgiveness. I crossed a bridge of sighs. Each plank exhaled as I passed. Not sadness, just memory. On the far side, I found a stone garden where time pooled like water. Each rock had a shadow that moved independently, pacing, pausing, waiting. I sat among them and waited too. After a while, a figure emerged from behind the slowest tree, draped in robes that changed color as they moved. They didn't speak. They simply held out a cup, not to give, but to share. I drank. It tasted like memory soaked in moonlight, a quiet flavor, the kind you miss while it's still on your tongue. The figure gestured toward the trees, where doors now stood between trunks, each with a different symbol. One was a spiral, one was a feather, one was a mirror that did not reflect me. I chose none, and yet one opened. Inside, it was not a room, but a thought I had once tried to forget, now softened, warmed by distance, waiting to be forgiven. I stepped inside, and instead of pain, I felt the absence of pain, like an echo finally fading. When I stepped back into the forest, the figure was gone, but the cup remained, now filled with light. I held it close, and the light did not blind. It wrapped around me, coiled gently at my throat and wrists, and whispered nothing, which was exactly what I needed. Further in, I found a clearing with a cracked marble bench, half covered in glowing moss. I sat, not because I was tired, but because the moment had waited long enough. A tree beside me split open with the sound of a sigh, and inside were portraits, but not of people, of feelings, guilt resting beside joy, longing curled up next to laughter. They looked like paintings done by someone who remembered emotion better than they experienced it. I touched one and suddenly remembered my childhood dog's final breath, then touched another and remembered how it felt to be held without expectation. The forest didn't ask me to stay, but it didn't let me go either. Eventually, I stood and turned to leave, but there was no path anymore, only sky. And from that sky, the ink river now flowed downward again, pouring across the moss, writing words into the ground. Let go. So I did. I lay down, let the forest breathe for me, and felt my name soften, felt my story become one sentence in a much older book. A breeze passed over me, and it did not ask where I had been. It simply welcomed me back. I followed the river deeper into the grove. Its waters flowed without urgency, a mirrored ribbon of stars and sky. The moon had risen higher now, but its light felt borrowed, as though filtered through someone else's memory. Each step on the damp soil released scents of pine, lichen, and something older, a sweetness like forgotten fruit. Insects hummed in harmony with my breath, and every rustle in the leaves seemed to respond to my heartbeat, as though the entire forest were listening. At the bend of the river, a gate appeared, not built, but grown. Twisting branches arched over the path like cathedral vaults. Lanterns dangled from the branches, but they held no flames, only faint echoes of light. As I stepped beneath them, each one flickered softly, as though it recognized me. Beyond the gate, a meadow stretched outward, velvety grass lit by bioluminescent petals. They pulsed gently, not quite with light, but with invitation. In the center of the field, a stone table stood surrounded by empty chairs, each one carved in a different style, none matching the next. A place where stories met, where timelines knotted together, where dreams once sat down beside one another to share silence. I approached slowly, unsure whether I was guest or ghost. But the wind did not turn me away. I placed my hand on the stone table. It was warm, and I felt words not read, not heard, but known. They weren't from a book, but from before books, a language of trees and sleep and soft departures. I sat down. The chair fit me as if carved for this moment, and the moment stretched. There were no clocks here, no bells, only the rhythm of breath and grass, and a presence that watched kindly without eyes. Then, without sound, the meadow shimmered, as if a veil had been lifted, and I saw saw them. Figures, faint but real. Each one seated at a different chair, facing outward toward different directions of the horizon. They were dreamers, or memories of them, perhaps both. They nodded to me, not in greeting, but in understanding. I wasn't late. I wasn't early. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, whenever that was. One of them, a child with hair like candle smoke, slid a small book across the table to me. It had no title, only a symbol, a spiral wrapped around a key. When I opened it, the pages were filled with my voice. Not my writing, but my voice. The things I'd never said aloud, but thought in quiet moments, while staring at ceilings or out rain-streaked windows. I miss you, one page whispered. I'm tired, but I keep going, said another. I'm afraid I've forgotten something important. Each sentence curled like smoke, fading before I could grasp it fully, but leaving warmth in its wake. And then the child said, "None of it is lost. You are still being written." The dreamers began to rise, not hurried, but with purpose. They each walked into different directions, into the meadow, into the trees, into the air itself. I stood too. The chair behind me dissolved into petals. The table became mist. And I realized this place had never been about staying, only about remembering how to go. I retraced my steps, or tried to. The forest had shifted. It always does, but I didn't feel lost, only changed. As I neared the river again, I found a stone in my pocket, smooth, warm, with a spiral etched into its surface. I smiled, not knowing how it got there, but understanding completely. The platform came into view once more. Lanterns now lit. The tracks no longer overgrown. The whistle sounded again, soft but clear. And I waited. Not for a train, not for a destination, but for the moment between breaths, between thoughts, where stillness lives. And as the stars shifted overhead, I remembered this is not the end. It is the next beginning. The path narrowed again, then vanished entirely. But I kept walking, guided now not by trail or sign, but by memory. Or maybe by something older than memory. A feeling that the world itself was nudging me forward. I stepped through low-hanging vines, into a clearing bathed in violet mist, where every sound felt hushed, as though I had entered the pause between dreams. There was a garden there, unlike anything I've known. The air shimmered with pollen light, and blossoms unfurled in slow motion, responding to the rhythm of breath. Leaves turned toward me as I passed, some with eyes at their centers, others with tiny mouths, whispering my name in voices made of wind. The trees arched above like cathedral bones, and from their bark bloomed small objects, toys, photographs, dried letters folded tight, memories of those who had walked these woods before. A figure stood among the flowers, not waiting for me, but existing beside me. They were draped in robes that rustled like pages, their face hidden beneath a hood of woven reeds, but their presence hummed with familiarity, like someone I had long ago promised to remember. They extended a hand, not as invitation, but recognition. I took it, and in that moment I saw, not images, but truths, memories layered like sediment, not just mine, but of every traveler who'd reached this garden. Joy that hummed through the stones, grief etched into roots, hope folded in petals still damp with dew. I wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming vastness of it all. That I had been here before, would be here again, that this place did not forget. The figure led me to the center of the garden, where a single bench rested beside a shallow pool. Its surface mirrored not the sky, but dreams, not reflections, but intentions. They gestured for me to sit. I did. And the garden listened. The flowers leaned closer. The wind stilled. Even the stars above blinked slower, as if holding their breath. I spoke, not aloud, but inwardly. Words that hadn't found voice until now. Regrets I had carried like stones. Wishes I had hidden in the folds of sleep. Names I had forgotten I loved. And the garden answered, not with language, but with stillness. That sacred, weightless stillness that says, "You are heard." The figure pressed something into my hand, a seed, no larger than a breath, but warm, alive. "Plant it when you wake," they said, though I never saw their lips move. I nodded and stood. The garden began to dim, not in sadness, but as if exhaling, satisfied. The path reformed behind me, soft moss glowing faintly beneath my steps. I walked toward the station once more, but lighter, as though the stories I had once carried on my back now walked beside me instead. And just before the garden vanished from view, A single blossom drifted through the air, landed on my shoulder. It pulsed with a soft light, as if to say, "Come back whenever you're ready." I did not return to the station at once. I let the path choose me. Let the night grow quiet enough that I could hear the way the trees breathed. Let the lanterns dim without extinguishing. Let the seed in my palm warm and begin to pulse ever so slightly, like a heartbeat, not mine and not the Earth's, but something between. The forest around me had changed again, not in shape, but in meaning. The branches no longer arched like questions. They curved like arms, opening, welcoming, and the ground beneath me softened from moss to something akin to velvet, as if the dream itself wished for me to walk gently, as if not to wake the parts of me that were almost asleep. I followed a sound, not a voice, not a whistle, but something like ink writing itself. A soft, deliberate motion, a hush of intention as quiet as snowfall in an attic no one had visited in years. The path narrowed, then widened, then ceased to be a path at all. Yet I kept moving, not because I knew the way, but because I understood, for once, that I didn't need to. When the fog cleared, the observatory appeared again. Not the same one as before. And yet, it remembered me. The dome glistened with dew that glowed faintly, as if freezing stars had landed and decided to rest a while. The door opened. No creak, no resistance, just a patient exhale, like a host stepping aside to let an old friend back in. Inside, the floor had changed. Where once there were charts and instruments, now there was a river of light, flowing slowly, without banks. And within it, fragments of constellations drifted as if asleep. The shapes of animals, the curve of spirals, the tilt of a crown, all loose from their place in the sky, all at ease. The telescope was no longer pointed downward. It wasn't pointed anywhere at all. It had been dismantled, reassembled, transformed into a chair. Obsidian and brass and velvet. A place to sit and do nothing but witness. I lowered myself into it. The moment I did, the river of light stilled, the room dimmed, and the dome above parted like eyelids calmly waking, revealing a night sky I could not name. but which knew me by heart. The stars were not arranged as they had been. They were arranged as I felt them, in constellations of moments, not of space. There was the shape of a promise, the arc of forgiveness, the outline of a first breath, the soft geometry of someone holding someone else's hand for the very last time. I let them wash over me, not as information, but as presence, the kind of knowing that does not require language, only the willingness to listen. Then, slowly, the stars began to move, falling into place in ways that made a quiet kind of sense. A sense I didn't try to understand. I only felt it arrive. The chair hummed, not with power, but with peace. I closed my eyes and opened them elsewhere. I was back in the city that had slept forever, but it no longer slept. Its windows glowed warmly. Its doors breathed. Its clocks didn't tick. They sighed, as if time had been forgiven for what it couldn't keep still. A train waited at the edge of an empty street. It had no rails to sit upon, no schedule to honor. It simply existed, like a thought that was finally ready to be had. I boarded. No conductor, no ticket, no destination, only welcome. Inside, the cars were not cars at all. One held a forest under starlight, another, a library that smelled of rain-wet cedar and warm bread. A third, a garden of glass flowers that rang like bells when the dream shifted in its sleep. I walked through them without hurry. Each space asked nothing of me but presence. Each space gave something back, even if I didn't know what I had received. In the fourth car, I found a table, 2 chairs, a teapot steaming, only 1 cup, and a small note. You never needed permission to rest. I sat, poured, drank. The tea tasted like endings that didn't hurt, like closing a door and knowing you could return when you wished, like the sigh of a room that had held your grief and now held your quiet instead. The train moved, not forward, but through seasons that never happened, through memories that no longer needed to be carried, through a fog that softened every sharp edge of every thought I had clung to. The fifth car was empty except for a window. Outside it, the lighthouse rose from the water, beacon spinning slowly, casting arcs of light across the surface of a sea made of sleep. The sixth car held a single bed, a single pillow, a quilt stitched from pieces of sky at dusk. No one lay there, not yet. I moved on. My hand brushed the edge of the doorway, and I felt the seed in my palm stir again. The seventh car was all mirrors, but none of them reflected me. They reflected versions of places that no longer existed, homes that had known me, trees that had been climbed, kitchens with lights still on long after everyone had gone to bed. The eighth car was not a car at all. It was a platform beneath a clock tower. A platform beneath the first clock tower. The one that chimes without sound. The one that calls not trains, but arrivals of another kind. I stepped out. The air was still. The stars held their breath. The lanterns lowered themselves just enough to bow. I walked to the very edge of the platform and opened my hand. The seed glowed softly, its warmth calm, steady, a small, persistent certainty. I knelt and planted it in a crack between the stones, not where a garden could thrive, not where rain would be kind, but where the footfalls of travelers might pass and feel something gentle rise through them, even if they never knew why. I covered it with the dust of old departures. I whispered to it, with breath that felt older than I was. You are not late, you are not early. Grow exactly when you are ready. The platform hummed. The clock tower chimed one note, not a bell, a heartbeat. And then the world inhaled, and the lights dimmed, and I felt a hand, not physical, not imagined, rest on my shoulder in recognition. I didn't turn to see who it was. I didn't need to. Some presences you greet by standing very, very still. The train doors opened behind me. A soft invitation, a quiet reminder. I stood slowly and chose not to board. Instead, I lay down. right there, on the platform beneath the chimeless clock, under the gaze of stars that had remembered me better than I had remembered them. The stone was not cold. The night was not empty. The breath that moved through me was not only mine. Somewhere, the observatory closed its dome. Somewhere, the lighthouse dimmed, satisfied. Somewhere, the garden folded its petals and slept, its memory intact. Somewhere, the library of drowned time turned a page and let an unfinished sentence finally end in peace. I let my eyes close. I let the story loosen its hold. I let the rails beneath me turn to roots. I let the sky become blanket, and blanket become ocean, and ocean become breath. There is nothing to carry now, nothing to solve, nothing to remember on purpose. Only this: you arrived. You were seen. You were heard. You are safe. Sleep now. The train will wait. The clock will keep still. The seed will grow. And when you wake, you won't need to hold any of this tightly. It will find you when it's ready. It always does. Rest. You are home.